Well, let's do a quick, first of all, hi, everybody. I'm Michael Goldberg. I'm our Executive Director for the Veale Institute of Entrepreneurship. Great to be together on a warm Friday here in Cleveland. And welcome our alum and good friend, David Sylvan, to our speaker series. Our friend Renee Canfield is here. David is not only a graduate of our EMBA program, but also serving as an executive in residence.
Yes.
Correct. Not entrepreneur in residence. Okay.
Executive.
There we go. But there's a lot of EIRs. We have an expert in
I know.
residence. I was just checking myself. Let's do a quick round the horn. So David and Alvisa know who everybody is. Start with you, Dave. Kind of name, major, hometown.
My name is Dave. I'm from Philadelphia. I am a chemical bio, health policy, health econ major. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you.
I'm Regina. I'm from Buffalo. I'm an international business major and a marketing minor.
I'm Adeline. I'm a senior studying biomedical engineering and I'm from Hungary.
Hi, I'm Hao, and I'm from China, and my major is biomedical engineering.
I'm Naomi. I'm from Michigan and I'm also a biomedical engineer.
I'm Andrew, studying biomedical engineering as well. I have a few minors in mechanical design and business.
I'm Jonathan. I'm from Philly. I'm majoring in computer science, minor in economics.
I'm David, and I wouldn't be accepted into the biomedical engineering.
Clearly.
Hi, I'm Alvisa. I'm computer science and economics major.
And Jonathan, originally master's in manufacturing engineer from England, a very long time ago. Now I'm in consulting practice advising companies on product innovation, mostly Internet of Things, sensors, connected devices, that kind of thing.
And quick intros.
Yeah. I'm Andy. I'm an alumnus of CASE. I studied chemistry and business management. I'm a manager at Accenture now. I'm in provider consumer experience practice.
Welcome back. That's great. Thanks. So I will flip it over to Alvisa. It's your first time attending, and I see some friends on Zoom. We're also streaming on LinkedIn. Please, Alvisa will sort of run the show, kind of a first bunch of questions, but we'll open it up to you all. So if you're here in person, just let Alvisa know if you want to ask a question. If you're on Zoom, if you can raise your hand or you can put it in the chat. And if you're on LinkedIn Live, put your question in the comment and then Britton and I will feed it in. So with that, Alvisa, over to you.
Okay, thank you. So as I said before, I'm Alvisa. I'm a second year. I'm studying computer science and economics. I'm from Kosovo, which is a small little country in southeast of Europe. I'm a Veale Snyder Fellow, which is for those of you who don't know, it's a program about students that are interested in entrepreneurship. And it kind of just connects you with top innovators and with like-minded peers. And I'm also the newest marketing intern for Veale Institute, which is one of the reasons why I'm super excited to be moderating this series event with David Sylvan, who's Chief of Strategy, Innovation, and Marketing at University Hospitals, as well as President of University Hospital Ventures. So to start off, I want to ask you maybe to give a little bit of an overview about yourself. So just a bit about your background, where you're from, your current job, and maybe what do you like to do for fun?
I love compound questions to start the day. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. I, as Michael will attest, perhaps in a less polite way, had no idea I'd end up doing what I'm currently doing. I came out of South Africa in the late 80s, was living in New York City, and eventually found my way to Cleveland, Ohio to join the sports marketing industry, a company by the name of IMG, the International Management Group, representing athletes, managing and owning sports events, owning television rights to events. So dramatically different from certainly what I'm doing now. My background was public accounting. I'd spent a little bit of time with Deloitte in South Africa, a predecessor to Deloitte in South Africa. And left New York City, was now living in Cleveland, thinking I'd now transitioned away from public accounting into professional sports. One thing led to the next, and I was offered the opportunity to formalize my understanding of corporate practice in the States, and I I attended CASE, the executive MBA. I'm proud of the fact that I was the youngest person ever to be accepted into the program. But I realized that was a bit of an impediment. I was too young, candidly, to be in the program, but they must have been desperate and had an empty slot. So that was in 94 and 95. And that enabled me, that was a catalyst for me to transition into a different industry. And I joined an investment bank. It was a broker-dealer, a small broker-dealer in this city known as McDonald Investments, McDonald and Company. Remnants of that still exist. Little did I know that Key Bank, which was a large commercial bank, was interested in forming its own broker-dealer platform, but the lift to do a de novo broker-dealer is immense. And so they acquired this entire platform, and it became the sales, trading, fixed income, currency platform for the bank. And the bank rebranded the platform as KeyBank Capital Markets Bank with a C. Again, thought I would only spend a brief amount of time doing this. Once again, like professional sports, was dropped into a scenario where I didn't really have a full grasp of the underlying of the job to be done, so to speak. But managed to eventually figure out how to find my place within the so-called derivative space. Very quickly, many of you may have studied this, derivatives, financial instruments that look to obviate the risk, blunt the risk from an entity that doesn't want the risk of transitions that risk, ports that risk over to an entity that can actually house, trade, or monetize that risk. Usually in the spaces of interest rates or currencies, commodities pricing, base metals, etc. In as much that I didn't have a math background, I did end up leading that platform, sales and trading. We were disproportionately large from the perspective of the bank's balance sheet. We had at that time, many years ago, $100 billion worth of risk at play. Number of CASE alum on the team. Our head of trading was a theoretical nuclear physicist, and his partner was a PhD in Chinese literature. Just to prove that anything that you do, don't ever feel that you're ring-fenced by your academic designation. To the extent that you have a desire and aptitude to learn, you can pretty much do anything. Did that for a while, took over an investment banking group known as Public Finance, which was a group of investment bankers looking to structure and trade tax-exempt paper for entities, non-tax-exempt entities looking to get into the debt market, schools, bridges, cities, hospitals, etc. Did that for a while. Did that across the country, spent about 15 years in that space, and eventually found myself with an opportunity to actually take my foot off the gas for a while, which I did. As Michael knows, Renee knows, I went to cooking school and I went to yoga school. And at that point, my wife said, I think I'm going to have to kick you out of the house. So I formed my own small consultancy practice. Once again, not truly sure what product I was selling other than my sense of humor. And one of the clients that approached me at that time was a hospital system. And their approach was they wanted some assistance in standing up an innovation platform. You'll see the theme repeating itself. I didn't know anything about that either, but eventually figured it out. I promise I'll get to the end of the question in a second, because Michael warned me about that. We morphed from a pure human-centered design platformed innovation platform. Professor Goldberg and others here at CASE were very instrumental in informing the vision that we eventually manifested. We bolted on true venture capital capabilities and now deploy money into the early stage primarily. Evelyn was a wonderful intern with us a few years ago. We miss you. And subsequent to that, I moved into a system role. I am still part of the ventures team, but I lead strategy and innovation, and now more recently marketing for university hospitals.
What do you like to do for fun?
My passion from a fun perspective, besides family, friends, food, would be travel with scuba diving is probably my primary focus.
Nice. So you've had such a dynamic career, like you mentioned, starting in accounting and finance, and then I guess moving into investment banking and fintech, and now you're leading the strategy, innovation, and marketing at UH. I wanted maybe to ask you to elaborate a little bit more about how you navigated these transitions from one industry to the other.
This was not an orchestrated walk. Sometimes circumstances, opportunity, good luck, bad luck, you have to be able to roll with the proverbial punches. And so as I found myself in a transition position to consider a new opportunity, I try to approach that with an open mind, not from the standpoint of, I don't think I know how to do that, but more from the viewpoint of, I think I'll be able to figure it out so long as I am surrounded by people who are subject matter experts. And so that's sort of how I've navigated those transitions. You know, patience, active listening, humility, I think is really important.
I wanted to ask you maybe because I know you have both experience in finance and healthcare, and I wanted to ask you what your opinions are about the new technological and financial advancements that are happening currently, and how do you think they're being incorporated into the healthcare system?
Healthcare is the strange animal where you can see a linear accelerator or a gamma knife in one room and a fax machine just outside of it. So the dichotomy of this coexistence of circa 1980 and the cutting edge living under the same roof is both an opportunity and a massive frustration. Healthcare in this country is by most measures broken, either from an access perspective or a cost transparency perspective, or from the perspective of glacial movement when it comes to change. So we have to find ways to disintermediate ourselves. And one way to do that is through technology enablement, especially when it comes to the gross inefficiencies in the business of healthcare, the back office of healthcare. At the front office, at the coalface, where the patient encounter occurs, you're also subject to all of the infrastructural instabilities associated with billing and coding and note-taking. And so if we can find and introduce viable technologies that will alleviate some of that administrative burden, I think that's where we're going to see our highest lift. There's already a self-propelled pace when it comes to new tools and technologies, clinical devices, therapeutics, drugs. That's already taken on a life of its own. But the chassis that needs to house and feed all of this technology is still suboptimal, and that's where there's a great opportunity.
Would you say that UH is like piloting a project that is incorporating any of these new technologies right now?
Hundreds.
Okay, would you like to mention a few?
No.
No?
Well, I'll give you one example, and it's going to be one that'll be familiar to all of you because you're probably experiencing some elements of it in your own life. But you probably are all familiar with going to see the doctor, and all you actually see is the side of the doctor's body because they're typing away. And then when they finish typing away, they've given you a whole 12 minutes of their valuable time. You might be given a poorly photocopied set of instructions with regard to what to do next. Not only are they incomprehensible, but they're skew and they're on yellow paper. Besides that, you put yourself in a position from an anxiety and stress perspective where you can't actually always remember what's just been said, especially if you are facing an illness. No one is choosing to go to a doctor. From the provider's perspective, they are not doing what they're trained for, which is caregiving and engaging with the human being because they have such an administrative burden. So as you're aware, there are a number of AI-driven ambient listening technologies, and those potentially have a multifactorial slate of opportunities. First of all, It can enable the physician to actually, the clinician to look at the patient and forge a relationship while the listening technology, the ambient genomics, if you will, translates what's being heard into the encounter note. The encounter note is critical for two reasons. First of all, it drives next course of action when it comes to patient treatment or prescriptions or therapies. But it also drives the business of healthcare because it populates the billing and coding, which enables the healthcare system to be paid. That same technology can then also take that encounter note and translate it into civilian speak. Curate it into a message that all of us can understand as non-clinicians, except you, Dave, you'll be able to understand it. But the rest of us will be able to understand because it'll be pitched at a threshold and a level where it's comprehensible and comprehensive and comprehensible. Might not be just for you, the patient, could be for the patient family, the caregivers as well. And all of that can happen without anyone touching anything. I think that is a huge opportunity for us, and we are piloting a technology for that right now.
Nice. Do you think there's any barriers into incorporating this new AI into our current system? And would you say that there's any downsides to it?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So the barriers are immense. First of all, we're dealing with health and harm. Second of all, we're dealing with privacy and data. And so the opportunity for the tool, the technology to become porous, this is where the IoT comes into it as well in many respects, but the opportunity for there to be malfeasance around this data is a huge critical issue. Taken to its extreme, we will in our very soon, and what will happen for you in medical school will be very different than it is today, Dave, is that there will be decision support tools that will really change the manner in which care is delivered. But the risk is that you, doctor, now place reliance on the technology and the AI, the Gen AI, to make a decision, to prescribe, to diagnose, and you are not as engaged as you could be, should be. It always needs to be that final human step. So there is the fear that some of these decision support tools could attract risk by virtue of taking onus and responsibility that the human being should have. I can't remember the second part of the question, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. The second part of the question was just, I guess, talking a little bit more about the downsides of integrating AI.
Yeah, the downsides are you're not sufficiently vigilant when it comes to
Yeah.
the build. You place reliance in large language models, which might be biased. You place reliance in a data set that doesn't take into consideration the totality of the population base. So those are some of the downsides. There are many.
Okay. I wanted to move on and talk a little bit more about your experience with startups and investment banking. And I think you mentioned in a previous interview about your experience of being a failed angel investor. So maybe if you could just elaborate a little bit more about these experiences and how they motivated you to be who you are now.
You know, my first deep dive foray into angel investing was all Michael Goldberg's fault. So about 14 years ago, Michael asked me, he must have perceived I was bored. He said, why don't you come to my class and teach a class on entrepreneurial finance? I had no interest, but I didn't want to disappoint him because he has a fragile ego. So I participated in the class and actually really enjoyed it. If you've never participated in any of Michael's classes, they are quite fascinating. He's not fascinating. The people that he brings to the class are fascinating. And I ended up never leaving. I stayed the whole semester, candidly, and Michael had to make up an excuse why this guy was loitering around this pool every week at the same time. And it sort of opened my eyes to a domain that I really didn't have much exposure to. When it came to investing, I was very familiar with industrial strength investing. So at the investment bank level, at the fund level, And so this was an eye-opening set of opportunities for me to understand the mindset of the entrepreneur and all the hurdles and tribulations that entrepreneurs face to get to an endpoint. And also that acknowledgement of a disproportional failure rate. But I thought, well, that's everyone else. So I'll be able to identify the things that I'll invest in, and I'll be able to disprove the mythology. For whatever reason, I began to focus on medtech, and I batted 0. I loved every company I saw. Founders were engaged, the funding was there, the problem to be solved was well articulated, the go-to-market pathway seemed to be defined, and I couldn't understand why they would eventually run out of cash. What I didn't understand is how complicated it is to sell into the provider world, how difficult it is for a healthcare system to adjudicate and then eventually adopt a new tool or technology. So when the opportunity came along for me to, as a consultant, work within the healthcare setting, I thought it would give me a vantage point of, let me learn what I didn't know. And I even underestimated how little I knew because of how complex it is. As a result, it helped inform me with regard to how our platform could be a more user-friendly version of what early stage companies usually have to experience when they're looking to engage with a healthcare system. So we created a pathway, actually placing reliance on one of Michael's former students here to help create this top of the funnel, this disposition adjudication mechanism to understand what might and what might not work within the healthcare setting. But that was really, I started as an angel investor and ended up sort of on the other side of the table.
Do you think the different industries and maybe also different cultures that you've been working with and maybe also different countries that you visited have impacted the way that you your approach to leadership and I guess to strategy, and how so?
So I think the world is becoming increasingly borderless. And I think there's a base layer, there's a base ethos of practice when it comes to leadership and entrepreneurism and management that's somewhat ubiquitous. And maybe Professor Goldberg has a slightly different opinion, but when you think, for example, of how your MOOC was accepted internationally and translated into dozens of languages, that transcended boundaries of language and culture. So I think there's a sort of base layer of commonality. Obviously nuances when it comes to each geography or jurisdiction and approach. There are rules and regs in different places that make it easier or more difficult for people to set strategy or lead or be entrepreneurs. But I think fundamentally it's about positioning people to manifest a true north and to empower them to achieve those end results. And I think that's borderless.
Do you think there's some common mistakes that people might make when they try to like do startups, I guess, or just begin their entrepreneurial journey?
I think it's false bravado and hubris. I think there's at times a lack of appreciation for how difficult that journey is. We have a friend, Michael and I, his name is David Levine, and Michael and I would have him come into class and speak about the entrepreneurial journey. And I remember one particular class, he started out by saying, who in this class thinks they want to become an entrepreneur? Half the class raised their hand. And he said, you're just gonna work as hard as you can. You're gonna be relentlessly focused on the outcome. You're gonna, all of the discipline associated with business modeling and hiring and your strategic plan, that's all gonna be your primary focus. And they all said yes. He said, and you're all gonna fail. And the class was, what do you mean? He said, I didn't hear one of you say that your marriage would fail, that you would run out of money, that you end up putting yourself in hospital because your health would fail. None of you said that. Because largely, those are the ingredients that are also needed when it comes to this crazy journey of being an entrepreneur. So I think an underappreciation for the lift is a potential hurdle.
I also wanted to ask, because I'm just wondering, since you have so much different experiences, what kind of impact do you want to leave on the industries that you're working on or working with?
You know, tough question. I would love to be viewed as an enablement and an ally. I'd love to be viewed as being part of a team that helped to facilitate a positive outcome, and in my specific use case, ultimately an impact on a patient or a family or a population or a community. That's the impact I'd like to.
Okay, so let's open up the discussion to everyone else in the room. So if you have any question, you can just raise your hand and I'll point it over at you and you can ask it. Or if you're joining from Zoom, you can just type it and yeah. Are there any questions?
I do have one. So when I worked with UH Ventures for that summer, I had the most amazing experience. Everyone on your team was so smart, but also so kind and supportive, and the environment was just a place where I could really feel comfortable at learning. And I was wondering, how do you approach building your team and building the culture of your team?
That is the most challenging aspect of leadership, I think, generally you find. You can find experts and brilliant people everywhere. But if you don't carefully curate the cultural mix and the interpersonality mix of the team, you can end up really manifesting in a toxic environment. The first cut is, does the individual have the expertise for the role? Sort of pretty easy. I spend a lot more time focusing on the person. You can actually achieve a lot if you just use the threshold of, is this a good person? Do I perceive this to be a good person? Where do they sit on a self-aggrandizement or ego or narcissism threshold? What informally can I glean from the perspective of how they treat others? You know, that notion of, you know, you treat the street sweeper the same way as you treat the athlete. Those are the people I want. And if you take the time into the curation of a team, finding those people, you can avoid a lot of the downside of just being surrounded by brilliant people.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Neil Khamis. I'm the lead of integration of AI into the courses of the Masters of Health Professional Education at Johns Hopkins University. And I'm the founder of SmartMed X Solutions for the provision of faculty development and consultancy for health professional educators. So part of the work that we're doing and trying our best for is how to train faculty to use AI without over-reliance and with preserving their cognitive skills so they are totally engaged, they have an input and they validate and verify whatever outputs that they are getting. And I would say that we have done some good achievement on this side when it comes to curriculum development, the research courses, moving to an elective specified course for the purpose. But when I reflect on what you have been mentioning about the over-reliance and having this type of confidence in the input of AI into diagnostics and management, etc., how do you see the type of collaboration that should be taking place between the clinicians and the industry so that we reach a point where we're gaining the benefit of using AI, not avoiding it, but at the same time, keeping a space for the engagement of the healthcare professional team. And as you have mentioned, there are a lot of concerns So bias is one, errors is another, and many. So how can we have this type of collaboration to guarantee that the experience would end up as we would like?
Yeah, I mean, that's the most complicated question we're all grappling with because there is a proliferation of new technology introduction right now. And I think part of the answer could reside in being very, very intentional around selecting and choosing those proof of concept or pilot opportunities where the architecture was driven by clinicians. You know, we come across a ton of brilliant tools developed by brilliant engineers or computer scientists who haven't flavored enough of the clinical human layer into the architecture. And that's a red flag for us. Now, what we might do in those situations is indicate that the tool or technology is not ready for prime time, but we would enter into a co-development type arrangement where we could begin to inculcate the underlying architecture with the human and with the clinical voice and touch. It's not a perfect science. We're trying to sort of build this bicycle and we're rolling downhill as we speak. We as an institution are taking a very conservative approach here. We, as opposed to Northwell Health or UPMC or Hartford Health, who are candidly all in when it comes to the adoption of generative AI, we've had to form our own intake mechanism to be very, very, very sensitive at a clinical, ethical, data, legal, compliance, and risk. All of those elements have an equal voice at the table to choose where we're going to place our bets. Do we run the risk of being left behind? I don't think so, because being an intelligent fast follower, I think, is an interesting strategy versus being the pioneer, especially when there are lives at stake and massive financial risk at stake. So that's sort of the approach that we're taking.
Are there any other questions?
Louis, thank you. It's been absolutely fascinating. I'm kind of curious, is there a difference or a distinction in the way you think that you nurture innovation in your environment relative to, say, a corporate, med tech company or a regular VC fund?
Yes. So I have the benefit of not having to place sole reliance on a single bottom line. I don't have LPs. I don't have a deployment and liquidity horizon, defined by traditional VC standards. I can afford to look to what we call the second or third bottom line. So the tool or technology, does it in fact impact the problem to be solved? And if it does in a measurable, material way, the sort of the cash on cash return becomes a nice to have, but not a need to have. And then, of course, that third bottom line, which we do in strong collaboration and affiliation with CASE, is does it facilitate or catalyze a research opportunity? So that is a threshold of success as well. I think for me, the distinction between standing up the tool or technology in fintech versus health tech is that human factor, is the person, are the people. And that adds a distinct layer of complexity and humility to the underlying build, which is a very high bar in my mind.
Thank you. One of the challenges I feel like a lot of our clients recently have been running into is a lot of folks in healthcare, I think, have adopted the sort of piloting mindset that you mentioned, where you start with, many small groups. And I think the challenges now that we're seeing a lot of them run into is both from like a technology standpoint, technical debt, like the maintenance of maintaining all of those different pilots and integrating them into the broader ecosystem of the hospital. That's sort of part one of the challenge, I think. And then the second part is like operationally enabling and maintaining all those different platforms. I guess, how do you think about that balance between, you know, wanting to test stuff and, like you said, making sure that the clinicians are involved in developing it while not losing sight of the fact that it can get overwhelming really quick, just because there are so many workflows that you could pilot. You could pilot your scheduling workflow, your provider templates, your what have you. There's so many, I guess, elements. How do you, I guess, kind of balance all that?
Well, I will tell you that initially we didn't, and that underscored and highlighted all the challenges that you're describing. We didn't pay enough attention to what does care, feeding, and maintenance look like post proof of concept or pilot. Whose budget is actually going to own the tool and technology if in fact it is viable? Did we actually engage with IT? What is piping into the EMR look like? And did we trivialize that and make it someone else's problem? So pilot fatigue became a real challenge for us as a system. You know, we as a healthcare system, we have 3,500 ongoing clinical trials as we speak. So we are tooled for this notion of experimentation, trial, etc. Of course, you know, if the NIH funding and CDC and FDA goes away, we won't have any. So that will make the day much easier. But when it comes to pilots, we now have to be very discreet from the standpoint of, have we gone all the way down the food chain in the introduction of the opportunity to ensure that not only is the clinical domain, if it's a clinical tool, intrigued with what's being solved for, but where is administration, where's legal, where's risk, where's budget, and what does it look like after we completely hand over the keys? We've introduced incredible technologies. Everyone's familiar with some of them. They became portfolio companies. We love them from an investment standpoint. UH turned them off. There are portfolio companies. We're not using the technology anymore because of everything that you're underscoring. So it's forced us to be a lot more discreet. What are we looking to solve for? Does it map back against the system imperative? And how many times should we be saying no, which is now a lot more than we used to. Not because we don't like what we see, just because we don't have the capacity to address all the issues that you just described.
Thank you.
You mentioned that you thought you were too young for the EMBA. I want to kind of pinpoint that. What do you think you did take away from that? And then even I'll push even further, now in the age of AI, it's everyone's favorite word. What do you think is higher ed's position in that? And is it even worth to go to grad school? Is an EMBA worth your time, your money, the effort, if you're not pivoting industries?
Andrew's not here, is he?
No.
So I'll start with the first part. Being young and inexperienced, I realized that I knew nothing about leadership and management and P&L ownership and the responsibility of the domain within which all of these other individuals were already pretty adept. But I did therefore get from that these incredible life lessons and vignettes that I still flavor into the way in which I carry out a conduct a day. Value of grad school, infusion of AI. I never think you should stop learning. Now, whether or not you do that within a formalized construct or you find other modalities, I think the power of graduate studies, if you're very discreet with regard to where you choose to place your bets, understanding what that ROI for you could be and should be. We all know we can study building the bridge to nowhere, and it's just a wonderful academic pursuit, but there's no yield. I don't think schools are sufficiently heeding that reality of the ROI associated with the product. And Renee and I have talked about this relentlessly. I'd still say yes. I don't believe AI is ever going to substitute for the dynamic power of interpersonal engagement and the learning that comes from that. It'll change the velocity of that process. It will change the manner in which you absorb, in which you can also produce output associated with that process. But I'd still encourage you to continue to study. Please.
You mentioned about like the med tech career where the medicine is like, from the medicine perspective, it's very people focused and then the tech perspective can be very like corporate focused. And then you also mentioned that one big aspect of like, or like one big obstacle in this field is like gaining provider support. So I guess from like an entrepreneur perspective, like what is something to think about or like important to think about to like ensure like successful integration into that field?
I think there are tons of incredible solutions chasing use cases, chasing problems. And I think the extent to which a lot more upfront time is spent understanding at a very granular level the problem to be solved will help to inform a better pathway to solution. And should influence the manner in which the solution becomes sensitized and bespoke to the problem being solved. That fidelity is really the differentiator in my mind. You know, we come across solutions we'll have an insurtech or a fintech solution approach us to say, we've solved for this in our industry. We think you could just overlay this in terms of some of your workflows on healthcare. That is round peg, square hole many a time. Not saying that they haven't solved for their problems in other industries, and other industries usually move quicker than we do. But the idiosyncrasies associated with our space requires that there be a very, very tight overlay between problem to be solved and tool to get there. So that's where I think you should focus attention. And you do that through ethnography and through observation, and through the voice of the customer, and through wireframing and Brandon Cornuke's book, The Value Proposition Matrix, and using those kind of disciplines to sort of give you guideposts around, are you actually in the crosshairs of what you're trying to solve?
You mentioned how you kind of pivoted through a lot of different industries and had many different focuses. What is your suggestion, I guess, to learning when to pivot and move on rather than staying on a project and trying to hone more in on it?
Yeah, you can overstay your welcome, or you can become trapped. I spent way too long in investment banking because I had golden haircuts, and I hated it. The last few years, I hated it. And I wasn't doing anything of any value in my mind. My health was suffering, but I didn't think I didn't have the courage to consider a pivot. Try never get yourself in a position where you don't see mission and vision to the thing that you're doing, where there isn't a true north to what you're pursuing. Easy to say, especially in your career where you kind of have to try things out and learn what you don't want to do. But eventually put yourself in a position where you're pretty proud of yourself when you wake up in the morning and you put on the work lanyard. I waited far too long to find a mission focus from a career perspective. And so I think it's that element that I would suggest could be the signal for you.
Sorry, kind of a follow-up question. When first starting off, I guess if you have many different ideas, how would you recommend knowing what to decide on and what to really put your focus into?
Try something that you hate. Do things that you realize I can't do this anymore, or I can't do it in this way. Very few of us, that very first thing we did, we're like, this is it, love it. So I think really narrowing the playing field from the perspective of experiencing what you don't want to do is a good way.
Thank you.
I had a quick question about kind of like integrating the technology into the healthcare. And I was kind of wondering if you could talk to what is maybe sort of like that ideal kind of status or maturity of the technology that comes in to be integrated into the healthcare system, and what does the pipeline kind of look like coming from introduction into figuring out all the kinks and actually making it translatable?
So as a research institution, we're not afraid of very early. So it can truly be that invention disclosure on the back of the number services. Because we have the expertise and the patience to begin to wrap around the enablements to move the opportunity downfield, to de-risk it, to determine viability, to create business models and plans around go-to-market, to think about the regulatory pathway, hurdles, et cetera. So from our perspective across the road, very early doesn't really scare us. So we would invest at what you know as the pre-seed stage, all the way out to probably Series C, but pre-seed and seed is really where we like to play. It also puts us in a position where we could be first to market with something that is truly de novo, it is truly novel. So we like the chance to differentiate ourselves by being the first with a new tool and technology. But the failure rate is massive. So we look at about 500 things a year. We do something with about 8. We invest in about 3. So the bar is pretty high. It doesn't mean that the other 400 and whatever are not any good. It just means for a variety of reasons. We didn't have a clinical champion and a pathway to integrate. We already had a technology that did this. We felt the TAM, the problem being solved wasn't large enough to be solved for. All of those, I mean, it's multifactorial, but you go from a large end to a pretty finite few. But from our standpoint, early does not scare us.
Are there any, okay, I want to ask a last question, which is, do you have any piece of advice that you would want to leave us with today, especially considering that most of us here, I guess I'm assuming are students, so what would you say to us?
Don't think you're constrained by what it is you're studying right now. And at this age and stage, I wouldn't think about your 5 and 10-year plans. I would think about your next 2 years. I would really put yourself in a position where you expose yourself to opportunity, that permission yourself to adopt, to change pathways or pivot as circumstances would allow.
Thank you so much for your great advice and for answering all of our questions. Thank you to Michael for having me moderate this speakers event. I'll hand it
Great,
back over to
thank you. Well, thanks, David, for coming back to campus, short walk across the street. And thanks everybody for being here today. For those that are with us, we have coffee and some snacks afterwards. Hopefully you'll be able to come. That's actually probably why you came. And for those on Zoom and LinkedIn, look forward to seeing you guys in person soon. I will